Welcome to this demo. In this demo, we're going to launch two EC2 instances. And on the screen now, you'll see a simple network diagram of what we're going to do. We're going to launch a Windows instance and an instance running Linux as well. We're going to launch our instances in a public subnet. So within a region, we have a VPC, Virtual Private Cloud. And within that VPC, we have availability zones. We just have the one showing here. We can then create subnets within the availability zone. We just have the one showing here in green. And we're going to use the default VPC, which already has the subnet set up for us. Then we're going to use the management console to launch an instance into one of those subnets. That instance is given an attached EBS volume. This is where the data is stored. The elastic block storage volume is essentially a virtual hard drive where the operating system and any data gets stored. We'll also attach a security group. The security group controls the inbound and outbound traffic. Essentially, it's a firewall to access our instance. We'll have to connect in on the internet using an internet gateway. The internet gateway enables access to and from the internet, and we can then manage our systems running in the public subnets directly across the internet. So, like I mentioned before, we'll set up a Windows instance and a Linux instance. Okay, so this is the AWS console, and the console home is the first screen that you'll see when you log in. And you'll see here on the top left-hand side, you've got recently visited services. And EC2 tends to always be in here with it being one of the most popular services. But if for some reason it's not, you can run a search at the top just by typing in EC2 and it comes up here. So if you click on EC2, it takes you through to the EC2 dashboard. There's a lot of information here, but much of it is going to be outside of the scope of this demo. But just something to note is that I've currently got no instances running in my demo account. So in order to launch an instance, we just click on the Launch Instance button. So we're in the Launch an Instance page, and the first thing we want to do is give our EC2 a name. So we'll call it as Demo Linux. Starting Linux EC2 first. Scrolling down, you can see all the operating systems that you can choose to have pre-installed in your EC2. You have the choice between Amazon Linux, Mac operating system, Ubuntu, Windows, Red Hat, SUSE Linux, and Debian. These are what are known as AMIs, which stands for Amazon Machine Image, and these are created by AWS. However, if you wanted to have the likes of WordPress pre-installed on your EC2 along with the operating system, you can go to the marketplace and there'll be some AMIs in there with those with WordPress already pre-installed. However, we're just going to stick with the Amazon Linux operating system for the moment. Next, you need to select the version of Amazon Linux that you want to have pre-installed. The latest release is 2023, which is free tier eligible, so we'll stick with that. Then you select your architecture between Intel and ARM. The default is Intel, x86, so we'll stick with that. And then you select your instance type, and here you can see the price per hour. And obviously, the more CPUs that you add, the more memory that you add, the more the price increases. The T2 Micro is actually free tier eligible, so we'll just stick with that for the moment. Then we need to create a key pair. So the key pair is a public and private key. It's cryptography, and we use it for logging into our instances. So we use it for secure connections over protocols like secure shell, and I'll show you how this works shortly. So we're going to create a new key pair. I'm going to call it EU West 1. Okay. So the reason I've given it the name EU West 1 is something to know that EC2 is a regional service, and my demo account is in the Ireland region, which is EU West 1. So I've just used that as part of the naming convention in here, just so I know it's for that region. So then we need to select the key pair type. We're going to stick with the default, which is RSA. For the private key file format, we're going to change it to .ppk because we're going to connect to our EC2 using PuTTY later. So we're going to create that key pair. The next section is the network settings. You have options to choose the network here, the VPC that you want to use, the subnet that you'd like to use, and auto assign an IP address, and also create security groups. We're going to be using the default VPC, so we don't need to worry about the first three. However, we are going to create a security group. So create security groups already selected. We're going to allow SSH from anywhere, which is the default, so we'll stick with that. Configure storage. It's defaulted to 8 gig. However, you can have up to 30 gig free under the free tier eligible scheme. So we'll stick with 8 gig for the moment for that. There's many more advanced settings, but it's going to be outside the scope of this demo. So we're just going to launch an instance now. and you'll see the instance being launched in here. So here you can see it in a pending state. It will take a few moments to go into running state. So what I'll do is I'll pause the video now and start it again once it goes into running state. So whilst we're waiting for our Linux EC2 to move into a running state, I thought we'd go back and launch our Windows EC2. So we're back in the launch and instance page. So again, we need to give it a name. So we'll call it Demo Windows this time. Select the Windows operating system. And then you've got the different releases that you can choose from. We'll stick with the Windows Server 2022, which is free to eligible. You don't have the option to select your architecture this time, it has to be Intel. The instance type, we're going to stick with T2 Micro. We need to create a new key pair. So let's rename this. And the reason we have to create a new key pair is this time we're going to use the .pem private key file format. So we'll create the key pair. The network settings are all the same. We can use the same security group as we did, so we're going to select that from before. So when it was created, it gave it the name Launch Wizard 1. So we'll select that option. Configure storage, it's defaulted to 30 gig, which is still under the free tier eligible amount. So we'll stick with that, and then we'll hit Launch Instance. View instances. So please ignore all the other terminated instances. That was just me practicing for this demo. But you can see the two that we've created, the demo Linux and demo Windows. You'll now see that demo Linux is now in a running state and it passed 2 of 2 checks. So soon the demo Windows EC2 will also move into running state and pass 2 of 2 checks. Okay, so it's been about 5 minutes now. You can see that both EC2 instances are now in a running state. Both have passed 2 of 2 checks. Just to show you a little bit more information up here, you can see the DNS information, the availability zone, the public IP version 4 address information. If you assigned an elastic IP address, that would be showing in here. And if you also assigned an IP version 6 IP address, that would show in here. You can see if monitoring is enabled or disabled. You can see the security group name that applies to this EC2 or each EC2, and also the key name that applies to each of the EC2. So what we're going to do now is we're going to connect to the Linux instance. So in order to do that, what we need to do is use a piece of software called Putty. So in order to download Putty, you would go to this website here, www.putty.org. And I've actually already downloaded it, and I've just opened it up here. So there's a couple of things you need to enter into here. The first thing is you need to enter the host name or IP address. We're going to use the IP address. Now you would use the public IP address. So this is the Linux machine. We're going to take the IP address from here and paste it into here. Next thing is we need to use the private key that we downloaded earlier. Something I should have just mentioned earlier is when we created it, it downloaded to my desktop. So we're going to select that here. So if we go into connection, SSH, authentication, credentials, and we're going to browse to the location of my key. Here's EU West 1-KP. There's one more thing we need to enter into here, which is the username, which is under connections data. And we're going to enter EC2 user. And then we hit open. And you can see it's now connected to the Linux EC2. Now we can confirm this is a correct EC2 by looking at this IP address here. This is actually going to be the private IP address. So this was the public IP address. So if we go into the instance, and you can see the private IP address up here. So 172.31.4.141, and that matches. So that's us connected to the EC2 Linux instance. Okay, so we're now going to use RDP to connect to our Windows EC2 machine. So Windows EC2 is listening for connection on desktop protocol port 3389. So what we need to do is make a little amendment to the security group. So if we go to the instance ID for Windows here and go to the security tab, this is the security group that we created earlier, and you'll notice that just port 22 is open here. So we need to go into the security group, edit the inbound rules, and we're going to add RDP. We'll add the port 3389. For the source, we're going to enter 0.0.0.0/0, which just means all IP addresses. We'll save the rules, and we'll go back to our EC2s. So we now need to go up to Connect and select RDP client. Now under here, you can see there's a public DNS information for the EC2 Windows Server. There's a username, but we need to get the password. So in order to get the password, we click on Get Password, and we're going to upload the private key file. And this is the second private key file that we created when we created the EC2 Windows machine. We're going to select that, upload it, and decrypt the password. And then this shows you the password that we will need to connect to the EC2 Windows machine. So now if we open up Remote Desktop Connect in Windows, we're going to enter the DNS information into here. The username, we're going to enter administrator. We'll click on Connect. Now we need the password, so this is the password that we need. Okay. Click on Yes. And it's just connecting now. It takes a few moments to load. And here we are, just loading up now. And there we are, connected to our Windows EC2 machine. And then you would use it just as you normally would your Windows Server. So to close it down, you just click on the X here. Okay, so I'm just going to show you how you terminate your two instances now that you no longer want to use them. Just before I terminate them, I'll just show you how you would put them in a stop state. So you'd select one of the servers here, and you'd hit instance state, and then you put it into stop instance. And that would stop the instance. So for example, if you wanted to close the instance down overnight, but you wanted to keep everything intact, you could just put it into stop instance. You wouldn't be charged throughout the night, and then in the morning, if you just changed it to start instance, everything would be back to normal. However, just something to note is when you stop and restart an instance, the IP address version 4 does change. So it's just something to pay attention to. But in order to close both the EC2 servers, just click them both here. We select terminate instance, and it just confirms, do you want to terminate these instances? Yes, we do. We'll just hit terminate, and it just shuts down the instances. And in a few moments, that will turn to terminated. That concludes our webinar for today. Thank you very much for joining. I've put on the screen now both Stuart and my email addresses. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And I thank you again for joining.